without any further, I will bring Gary up here, and I'm also, you gotta buy the book while you've got the author here, because he will sign it. I've seen him do it once.
Well, thank you very much, Morgan. Thank you, Leslie, and both of you for inviting me, and Hank for, I don't see Hank, but, I'm right here. Oh, there you are. Okay. It's just a pleasure to be here, and you know, I really feel as though there is a revolution going on in the way we produce food and the way we think about producing food. And I think of it, the more I think about it, it's not a revolution in food production, it's a revolution in ethics. And we're bringing ethics into the process of producing food. And I think that's a great and very positive step. I learned a couple of years ago that it's always a good idea to acknowledge the people who are actually doing the work while I get to stand up here and yabber. Because I always run out of time at the end. So these are, over the last 8 years, these are some of most of the students who've worked with me. I couldn't do this without the help of a lot of farmers, of people who are willing to pay the bills, or agencies that'll pay the bills. And absolutely, we could not do this without our dogs, because they make it possible for us to move the animals in ways that simulate the way wild animals would move across a landscape, and that's what we're interested in. So let me begin sort of at the beginning. There's an old Chinese curse that says, "May you live in interesting times." And these are interesting times in the environment. We are up against our carrying capacity for our species on the planet. I'm not sure most of you know this, but we're actually in what's called the 6th great extinction. We have not been extinguishing species at a rate that we're seeing now in 65 million years. And part of those species, or many of those species, are pollinators. They're the ones who pollinate the crops that we grow for food. We're seeing climate change, and I think even the climate doubters are now starting to be at least climate maybeers. But we are seeing, right now, 60% of the country is in drought. Where we get 70% of our food, the Central Valley of California, is out of water, flat out of water. That's not going to do good things for the price of food. People in the central United States are getting rid of their cattle because there's no food for them. So we are in the middle of some really challenging or interesting times. And my work has had to do with our food system and the way we grow food. And I would say, just to make a broad brush summary statement, in the last 70 years, we've really screwed things up. We have made some very, very drastic mistakes. From the production of fossil fuel intensive monocultures for growing our grains and our crops, to the removal of livestock from the farm, putting them onto feedlots where their waste products, which used to be fertilizer, are now pollutants, where they're given hormones that if you were caught taking those hormones in an athletic event, you would be eliminated from that event. To privatizing our most precious crops and patenting them and genetically modifying them, adding genes, and not having farmers add those genes, because farmers don't know how to add those genes. Farmers modify genes selectively in a laboratory. Very bright people who have never seen a cow or know what corn really is in terms of a food system are sticking genes into this corn and into these animals. And this is very dangerous. We're seeing 2/3 of the world's grasslands turning into deserts right now. And as I said, we're losing some of our most important pollinators. So now that I've got you all in a good mood, let me start telling you about how I see the solution. I see the solution not coming from any particular place, but from every place. These challenges have to be addressed by our nation's problem solvers, coming from many disciplines. And nowhere better do you see that than in agriculture, because that in a farm family, you have expertise in multiple places. So I'm a biologist, but my wife, back there, the cute one, my wife has been managing money. Her major was math, and she was the business manager at Albany Law School. I haven't balanced my checkbook in 40 years, okay? But so what I know about, so when it comes to taking the temperature of the ram, guess who's back at the back end? But when it comes to figuring out how much we should be spending for a ram, who's at the front end? And I think that multidisciplinary approach to problem solving needs to transfer to a global scale. I really love this Lakota, Sioux proverb. If each of us describes what we see from where we sit, we'll never fully understand what we're looking at. Only by looking at things from many points of view can we ever truly understand them. And that's what I'm going to be talking about, both from my own perspective as a farmer, but also from my perspective as a university professor and research scientist. A few years ago, we were talking to a land manager. A land manager is basically a feudal lord in the state of New York, managing state lands. And we were talking to him about using our animals, our livestock, to replace his tractors to save him some money, because I didn't even want to talk about fossil fuels, but save him some money and manage his mowing job. And he said, it sounds great, but I just can't get my head around, as Morgan said, the idea that agriculture and conservation can ever go together. And that is a real problem. That's a real problem. This is land that's managed by USDA. And what they've done is they've taken the animals off of it. They've taken the humans off of it. They say, we're not part of the ecosystem. We're humans. We have no stake in this. This is land that's managed by grazers. Okay? This land is being eaten, okay, and grazed. And the farmer who's grazing this land with his livestock has a stake in this. This farmer is part of the ecosystem. This place has humans dominating it, but no stake in the ecosystem. Humans are removed from the ecosystems because somehow humans are not natural. I go back to the words of the father of conservation biology, who is Aldo Leopold. Here it is. A land ethic changes the role of Homo sapiens, that's us, from conqueror of the land community to plain member and citizen of it. That's the father of conservation biology. Which side of the fence would that father of conservation biology be more happy to see? The side that's grazed or the side that's from which humans are excluded? If you were to ask any of the landscapes in the Northeast what they would want to be, they would all say pretty much the same thing. We want to be forests. In New York, the land wants to be covered by forests. In much of New England, the land wants to be covered with forests. But in reality, the land is covered by cities and towns and suburbs and farms. And I think of a farm kind of as a compromise with nature, a compromise, a midpoint between wild nature and the urbanness of the city or the suburb. The farm is our fitting into nature. So certainly this is not a forest, but there are some forests there. And certainly, in New York, there are no herds of bison that ever ran through New York. But if you look at New York today, whether we like farms or not, New York is a grazed landscape. Each of these red dots represents the location of an organic dairy operation in New York. There are a lot of red dots there. Okay? Whether we like it or not, New York is a grazing landscape, a grazing ecosystem. So let's figure out how to use that grazing ecosystem properly, how to optimize the function of these ecosystems while still producing food and fiber for us. Because we're stakeholders in the land. We are not unnatural. We're 100% natural, by the way. Okay. We know this is not the way to do it. We know that fossil fuel intensive agriculture cannot be the form of agriculture that will get us into the 21st century. We know that monocultures, nature abhors a monoculture. It's been proven over and over again. Diversity creates stability. I said it today in the field as a joke, but you know, next time you go to your stockbroker, tell them you want to buy one stock, right? They'll laugh at you because they want you to have a balanced portfolio. Diversity, whatever system you want to deal with, diversity creates stability. In nature, wild nature, diverse ecosystems are stable ecosystems. In agriculture, diverse ecosystems are stable agricultural ecosystems. This kind of singular monoculture requires management with huge amounts of chemicals that work for a little while, and then you develop resistance, and so you get more chemicals, and those pests become resistant, and ultimately you have the farmer, the consumer, paying for all those chemicals. And, oh, by the way, the chemical companies are just fine with this model. But it's not a way of going into the 21st century. The production of food in California and the loading of that food on a truck and transporting it across the country 3,000 miles to sit for a week on your grocery shelf or your grocery produce section is not a way of producing fresh food or a way of producing food responsibly when we can provide the same foods, most of them, here. And I'm not suggesting anybody give up orange juice because we can't grow orange juice here, at least not yet. We can't, and nobody should ever give up chocolate. Okay, so we're on the same page. Okay, so, but that kind of agriculture, that industrial model has led to a loss of some 44% of the birds that live on our farms. It's resulted in the loss of our pollinators, and I can't say this enough times. The Chinese are actually out there pollinating by hand. We can't do that. We're renting beehives in America. And as the bees are seeing more and more catastrophic failures of hives, or as beekeepers are seeing more and more catastrophic failure of hives, the cost of food and even the provision of food comes into jeopardy. And so what I've been thinking about for the past 7 years or so, and maybe even a little longer, is something that is happening right now in agriculture. I took my students to the farm this morning to the farmer's market where I sell bread. Every Friday during the summer, I bake 130 breads. I bring them to the Delmar Farmers Market in Delmar, New York, right outside of Albany, and in 2 hours, I sell 130 breads. Okay, that's better than a bread a minute. Okay, they're good bread, obviously, but that's not the whole thing. When I run out of bread at 11 o'clock on a market that's going to go till 1 o'clock, and somebody comes up to me and says, how come you don't have bread? And I say, I'm out. They'll say, good for you. They won't say, why can't you make more bread? No, they'll say, good for you. I'll have to get up a little earlier next week. And I always tell them we give them more Saturday. But at the end of the day, people get it. There is an emergence going on. I told my students this morning, I bet you don't feel like revolutionaries, but you're in the middle of a revolution among these tents in the farmers market. This is a revolution in the way we get food. It's a revolution in the sense that the farm is becoming recognized as an ecosystem, and we are becoming recognized as players in the ecosystem, and that the farm is part of a deeper economy that goes beyond just the exchange of cash for commodities, goes into the respect for craftsmanship, the building of bonds between producers and consumers. And if you think that's not true, this book, when I wrote this book, I was embarrassed because I gave the first draft to two of my friends who are customers at the market. And they're both professional editors. And the first one told me, it's good, but I found your topic sentence on page 12. And that's, topic sentence should be on page 1. And the other one said, you started every sentence with and or but. You shouldn't do that. I said, I did not. He said, read it. Oh. And they wouldn't even take a free bread for that book, for the work they did. They were just pleased to humiliate me. No, they were just willing to do that. When the farmer that produces vegetables for Pam and me hurt his back one year, we belong to a CSA, a Community Supported Agriculture Program. So we give this guy $350 in February, and from June till November, we're getting a bag of vegetables every week. We buy a share of his harvest. Okay, and he has like 500 families who do this. And one year he hurt his back, and he actually needed surgery. Now, if he had taken a loan for those vegetables, for his seeds, rather than taking the $350 from all of his customers, he would have been broke because he'd have to pay back that loan, but he hurt his back, so he couldn't produce vegetables that year. So I imagine he must have thought that my customers are going to be really mad at me. I've got to try to produce something. But we're all thrilled because we saved the farm. Okay? And that, you see this over and over and over again. It's a revolution in ethics. People are becoming more human as a function of this. What is sustainability? Sustainability is simply the capacity to endure. I mean, I guess Kansas, actually, the Kansas legislature actually tried to pass a bill that said they would not approve any legislation with the word sustainable or sustainability in it, and which is fine, I guess, who wants to endure? And the UN defines it something like using resources in ways that do not limit their availability to future generations. That's nice, but I really like the way it's been defined in agriculture. It's called the triple bottom line, okay? Because farmers farmers don't like fuzzy stuff, and sustainability is a fuzzy word. But the triple bottom line sounds like very agricultural, very farmer-esque, and it has three basic components. This triple bottom line: environmental stewardship, economic viability, meaning it's not so bad to have a profit. That doesn't make you a bad environmentalist. In fact, if you try being uneconomically viable or economically inviable, you'll find that you can't be a conservationist. Okay? So economic viability and ethical behavior, both to the human and non-human components in your world. So to us, it's very important that our livestock are treated well. And it's really funny because I say to people, I actually had one customer who is an attorney, and I said, it's important that these animals don't receive any chemicals. He said, well, that's good, and that they're treated well. He said, I don't care about that. But nobody else has ever said that to me, only a lawyer. But Hope there are no lawyers in the room. But there are, sorry. There are good lawyers and bad lawyers. This was not a good lawyer. But the most of my customers, virtually all of my customers, really do care that Pam and I go to Phelps, New York, in the middle of nowhere, to pick up chickens, because the people that we bought the chickens from don't oblate their beaks, don't cut their beaks off. That tells us that the chickens aren't packed too tightly, because when they pack too tightly, every chicken has a pecking distance, and if you cross it, they'll peck at you. And so these chickens have their full beaks, which means that they're not crowded. And to me, that matters, because that chicken can be a chicken. And as a reward for our allowing them to be chickens, they gave us great eggs. And some of our chickens have produced eggs that are so big that we actually can't close the boxes. And our customers really love that. So it helps our economic viability. And as Joel Salatin, a great sustainable farmer, says, the chickens are our colleagues. They're on the same page as we are. They are co-workers with us. And to treat your co-workers fairly, whether they're human or non-human, is really an important thing to me. It matters to me. When I'm going to be the one who makes the decision to kill a lamb, I'm going to be damn sure that that lamb is treated well and respectfully, whether the lamb knows it or not. I know it, and it's a revolution of ethics. And that's our farm, and that's to me a wonderful way to live, and it's a way that celebrates the agriculture as a part of an ecosystem. And and we're still profitable, and we're still growing animals, and we're still slaughtering animals, but we are making an effort to do it in a way that is ethical. We're not the only people who buy into this process. This is the farmer who hurt his back. He's sitting down because he hurt his back. But he's a pretty smart guy, and so is she. They're both Harvard graduates, and he has a master's from Stanford. I always say we had the smartest vegetables in New York. This guy has his bachelor's degree from Amherst College, not UMass Amherst with the agricultural school. Amherst College, the home of Emily Dickinson. He was an anthropologist. He's got a job with a nonprofit. He found nonprofit work to be not very exciting. He wanted to do something for people, and he didn't feel like he was doing that. He grew up in Manhattan, by the way. He learned how to farm from this guy, who's a biodynamic farmer and just a wonderful person, been at it for 30 years. He's making a profit, but he's sustainable. This guy now feeds 500 families in New York City and the Hudson Valley. And he just bought 800 chickens. He's now competing with me. So, and he's great. This lady is an attorney. See, I told you they're good attorneys. Okay. And this guy actually is a general contractor. This guy has a PhD in animal science and was the chair of animal science at SUNY Cobleskill. He is my mentor, Jim Hayes. These are real people. And these are just a few people in New York that I personally know that are buying into this. What? Is that the guy from Roxbury Farm? Yes, yeah. That's John Paul Cortens. Just an incredible guy, incredible. And he trained this guy and this guy, this family.
We did the same kind of project we did with Caretaker Farm a couple of years afterwards.
Yep, just an incredible farmer. And biodynamic, by the way, is like organic on steroids. In organic farming, you're allowed to bring some things in to the farm. In biodynamic, nothing is brought in. Everything is produced on the farm. The only direction that things travel is out of the farm. So you're producing food that is the highest quality. And Science Magazine did a 20-year study, or they reported on a 20-year study from Switzerland on farming. And these guys were producing 80% of the produce that was produced by conventional farms with half of the inputs, half of the chemicals and energy. So this is an unabashed plug for my book. And basically the message of the book is it's getting better if we let it. If you look at the number of farmers markets in this country, since 1994, we have seen a constant 16% increase in the number of farmers markets every year up until 2010, and it's continuing even now. And every year I go, I'm on Senator Gillibrand's agricultural working group. So every year I go to Washington. Every year I'm sitting down with USDA guys, and every year they say, well, it's gonna stop going up soon, we're sure of it. And it just keeps going up. And if you look at community-supported agriculture programs, in 1986, there were 2 of them. Anybody know what states? Massachusetts and New Hampshire. That's right. No, it's not. It was in South Egremont.
Oh, Indian Line.
Indian Line, right. And Temple Roots in New Hampshire. And those were the only 2 CSAs. Today, there are over 8,000 that USDA is tracking. That's 30,000% in 30 years. That's 1,000% per year growth. There's nothing in any part of American business that's growing like that. Okay, so.
Are they primarily Northeast?
No, they're all over the country. There's a huge number in California and the West Coast, Seattle, Portland, throughout the entire country. I was surprised that they even have a lot in Kansas. I didn't think anything was. They weren't even allowed, but they just can't say they're sustainable. Okay. So what's the difference between the 2 food systems? Well, in conventional agriculture, the focus is on production. How fast can I grow the crop? How much can I produce? And how little can I spend in time and cash to get that crop up and out? Okay? In the emergent system, and Morgan mentioned a lot of these things today in his pasture walk. How can I improve the land? Why would I want to improve the land? Because that's my raw materials, for God's sakes. How can I improve the land? What do I want out of my farm? It's not just profit. It's maybe the ability to work with my children. It's the ability to have a beautiful place, to celebrate the landscape, if that's what I want out of my farm. That's a reasonable goal in sustainable agriculture. What's the healthiest system that I can produce? Because in the new modern agriculture, we realize that land health equates to the health of our produce, to our product, and that ultimately equates to our own health. So what's the bottom line in conventional agriculture? Profitability. What's the bottom line in the new modern agriculture? Environment, economics, and ethics. 3 bottom lines, a triple bottom line. And last time I was in Washington, even the bureaucrats at USDA were using that phrase, the triple bottom line. Conventional agriculture is scaled globally. Let's send everything to China, okay? Come on. The emergent system is scaled locally. How can I feed my neighbors and still make a profit? Okay. Conventional agriculture is scaled to monoculture and to singular markets. Diversity is the key to modern agriculture, variety in our crops, so that if one thing fails, something else is still there for us. Variety in our markets. I have so many friends. I have a friend who grows apples. If all he did was grow apples, he would be out of business. But he and his brother figured out that if they ran a golf course through their orchards, they would be sustained and they would be able to continue growing apples. That's the most important part of their operation, is their golf course. Okay? I would be remiss to call Jimmy Abruzzi anything but a great farmer. And he doesn't play golf, but he has a golf course. And my brother-in-law and sister-in-law who celebrate golf as a religion just love playing that course because they kind of munch a couple of apples along the way. It's just, it's really creative, and it's diversification. Conventional agriculture segregates agriculture from the wild landscape, and the emergent system tends to integrate it. This is Alan Savory, an African who came up with this whole concept of what we call holistic management. And he actually did it in order not only to grow cattle for himself, but to grow landscape that allows wildebeest, zebras, and elephants to live right on his land in Zimbabwe, along with his livestock. And it works. It works 100%. And so my own journey has taken me from a focus on sustainable agriculture on my own property to research into a kind of grazing that can be used to manage landscapes, even for governments or for organizations or for land trusts, to a program called the New York State Conservation Grazing Program, which allows a new way of thinking about getting young people into farming. And I'll explain more about that. And as I've gone through my focused or applied research on targeted grazing, a whole bunch of new questions, basic fundamental questions have come up, and that's allowed me to research, to study the ecology of grazing on these landscapes, and that has informed my own research, my own farm, and how I think about the management of my land. So let me show you some things. This is a wildebeest about to become dinner. This is how wild ungulates, wild hoofed mammals, see the world. And it's a dangerous place. And because it's a dangerous place, they tend to pack or aggregate tightly because there's safety in numbers. The ones who don't aggregate don't show up for breakfast in the morning. And so while they're aggregating, they're also urinating and defecating on their food supply. So what do you have to do? You have to move. So aggregate tightly and keep moving. That's the secret to being a healthy ungulate. And that's the way Africa looks. That's the way Wyoming looks when bison are running through it. That's the way large ungulate ecosystems look. So what have we done? Well, I didn't invent this, but this is what works. And this is what Morgan is implementing here, is we take a large landscape and we divide it into small parcels. We call them paddocks. Okay? And we concentrate our ungulates, our livestock, into these paddocks and keep moving them rapidly through the system. How much, how fast? It depends how you want to manage, what you're managing for. When I'm managing for purple loosestrife, we'll make a cycle. That land will see animals every 2 weeks. Okay? When I'm managing for a really bad invasion of purple loosestrife, when I'm just managing for my land, that landscape will, or this individual paddock will see animals maybe once a month, maybe not even that many times. Okay? And because I do research, whatever we do, we always, in our research, we always run a section or a set of paddocks that don't have anything, any grazing on it. So I can compare what happens to grazing and non-grazing. But this is reality. This is my farm. And these are my paddocks. Now, it looks like they're all divided up into, my whole yard is all fenced up. It's not. There's one movable electric fence like we have right out here. And that fence moves through the landscape. We call it intensive rotational grazing. And I have about 4 tons of livestock equivalent per acre. So right now I have half-acre paddocks, so I have 2 tons of sheep in my paddock, and every 2 or 3 days, right now we're doing it every 2 days. Pam says I'm driving her crazy, but every 2 days we're moving that fence, that one fence. Well, what does that do? Well, the rest of the field, and we don't have any perimeter fences, so the rest of the field is wide open. We have coyotes in there. every night. Every night my sheep go into their barn, or the barnyard, and the coyotes are out there cleaning up the vermin, the rats, the mice, the voles. We have no rats in our barn. The number of times I've put down rat poison, I can count on my right hand. The coyotes do the work for us. I've seen coyotes a few times. I've shot one who got a little too frisky. But for the most part, we never see them. Every so often I know they're there because I'll find their scat, I'll find a half a rabbit in front of the barn. I know they're right at the barn, but they don't go in, okay? They're taking care of the land for me, okay? And I'm providing landscape full of food for them. They don't have to mess with my sheep because there's plenty of food out there. And they know what's gonna happen if they're smart animals. Okay, this is a research site where we have a grazed and an ungrazed, the red are grazed, and ungrazed paddocks. And again, even the ungrazed paddocks were not marked, were just marked. They weren't fenced. So there was only one fence on the field at any time. And we were actually studying this little guy here. That's multiflora rose. And we were looking at how sheep could damage multiflora rose. This is just a few data points. This is Lythrum salicari purple loosestrife. This is a sheep eating the Lythrum. You notice that there are no flowers here because we put the sheep on before the plant went to flower. That way we don't have to worry about the question of whether sheep transport seeds. There are no seeds. Before the seeds ever came out, before the flowers ever came out, the sheep had this stuff down to the ground. And the cover of purple loosestrife increased on the ungrazed site over the summer by about 12 or 13%, and it decreased by 46% in the grazed site. Okay, no chemicals, no fossil fuels, sheep. Okay, this is Phragmites, or the common reed, very, very invasive plant. This is a sheep that thinks Phragmites is just the best thing since buttered toast. We were surprised because it was a very stalky plant when we put the sheep on the plant. We didn't think they would eat it. They thought this was great. And this is what the Phragmites looked like a year later. This area had not been grazed and it was 200 centimeters high. This area had been grazed, and we talked about this on the pasture walk today. It was 80 centimeters lower. It never grew the following year. If you remember the goldenrod, Morgan showed you how the leaves had been taken off the stems. What the sheep did by doing that is they robbed those goldenrods of their energy source. The plant runs on solar energy, and the leaf is a solar panel. And the sheep ate the solar panels. There's no energy going into this plant. Okay, what's going to happen? Well, everything is in the roots right now. Okay, if it's a tough winter, it's got to stay alive, it's got to expend energy just to metabolize. Okay, by the time spring comes along, now before the sun comes out, that plant has to get new solar panels up. Okay, that takes energy. Well, by the time the plant has done all that work, how much can it grow? Well, not as much. And the following year, we took that Phragmites right down to the ground. This is Milominate, a very invasive vine throughout the Northeast. This is where the sheep would be. This is before they were deployed. The reference site is out here. This is what the reference site looked like a month later. This is what the grazed site looked like. And at this very site, there was a rare species. My student found a rare species there. So you know what we did? We put up a little fence, and the sheep said, oh, this is the fenced area where the rare species is. We'll eat everything around it. And they didn't touch it. And as far as I know, it's still growing. It was a rare milkweed, actually. This is multiflora rose before, after. The sheep have grazed off, because the widest part of the plant is down below, the most photosynthetic biomass, the sheep actually, we estimated this, actually grazed off about 70% of the photosynthetic biomass of this plant. You know what happened to this plant? We mapped every plant on this field. There were over 500 plants. This plant died. It's dead. Okay?
Is that on the Romans bill?
Yes. Yeah.
I recognize the plant.
Yeah. If you look very carefully, you can see where Morgan carved his initials in. But the other thing we see is that when the sheep graze, and we're not the first ones to see this, when the sheep graze, we see this incredible increase in the number of plant species, some exotic, some that is not native, and some native. But the thing is, nobody seems to be dominating the ecosystem anymore. So here's a study that's about 2 months long, because we end our studies at the end of, when the students go back to school. So our studies never get to the final frost, which would be nice if we did, but we don't. But 60 days, 2 months, in any paddock during that 2-month period, the paddock only saw sheep for a total of 12 days, 4 3-day intervals. Okay? 25% increase in the number of species relative to the ungrazed control. All the way up, this was the second year that we grazed that Phragmites site, a 90% increase in species richness in the plant community. Even a place where we didn't expect to see this, because multiflora rose is a bush. The whole structure of that plant is different than what we're looking at in most cases. Even there, we saw a 12% increase in the number of species that were on the site within a year, when the plants had only received 12 days of grazing. And, you know, as I said, there are lots of models about what causes these things to grow, this to happen, this change in species richness. But most of these models suffer from two things. One is most of these models deal with either very, very low numbers of grazers and livestock, or wild bison or wild populations of grazers who evolved with their plant communities. And so when you put a cow on a pasture in America, but the pasture is actually made up of grasses that came over with the ancestral cows that the Europeans brought over, what's an invasive and what's a native? And it just becomes really tough. And by the way, all of this is correlation, so it doesn't explain why any of this stuff is happening. Okay, so what we're trying to do in our lab is explain why we see this increase in the number of species. And we're getting close. One of the first ideas was, well, you graze down the height of the plant canopy, and you got more light hitting the ground, so you can support more plants, more photosynthesis. So that was one hypothesis. The second was that the livestock were eating plants, producing feces and urine, which turn into nutrients and cause an explosion in the microbial community, and the microbes are actually creating new habitat and making more nutrients available for the plants. And so you get more plants and possibly more kinds of plants, or some combination of things. And that's sort of what we're favoring right now, although at least in its initial phase, the idea that it was just light, that the plants were grazing down the canopy and providing more light, doesn't really seem to hold water. We're not seeing any pattern in there. One thing we are seeing, though, is the moisture of the ground up to about about 0.45, about half a gram of water per gram of soil. Up to that point, the moister the ground is, the more species of plants we're finding. I'm not, well, we just got data the other day, which leads me to begin to understand that. And then we're looking at different grazing ways of grazing the animals and how that affects the microbial community. So, I've described this intensive rotational grazing approach where we move the animals every 3 days, and we've got them stocked at about 400% of conventional levels. Conventional grazing, which is continuous, and this is the way farmers mostly do it. They let their animals out, and they're out for the summer, and then you bring them in the winter, and that's grazing. So we looked at what happens to the microbes there, and then we looked at the microbes in an ungrazed reference site. And here's what we found. In the rotated site, like Morgan has introduced here, we have an explosion of soil microbes and an explosion of microbial diversity. We have bacteria, fungi, and mycorrhizae. And this week, we actually have sequenced the genomes of all the bacteria and fungi in the soil. And we're going to see if we can learn even more from that information. But that's just arriving this week. But basically, we see, at least in terms of the functional groups of microbes, an increase in functional groups in the rotational grazed, a decrease in the conventional system. You know, and basically what happened, we actually saw, remember I talked about how when the soil is bare, it cracks and carbon goes into the atmosphere and the water leaves. Well, that's exactly what happened after about 2 weeks of grazing, continuous grazing on my property. And it's still recovering after a year. And this is the ungrazed. Again, a small increase in microbial activity over the summer, but nothing near what we see in the rotationally grazed. What does that mean? Well, if we plot and there's a lot to look at 7:30 at night, but if we plot, and this is just our beginning data, our earliest data, the circles are from places where there was continuous grazing. So what we see is if we plot the change in vascular plant species richness, number of vascular plants in the field, against the microbial biomass, that big blue line, what you see is that as the microbial biomass increases, there's an increase in vascular plant species. Okay, so we know it's linked to the microbes. Where do you see that? Well, you don't see it in the continuously grazed sites. It's kind of little half and half in the ungrazed, in the reference sites, but in the diamond shape, the rotationally grazed sites, we see an increase in microbial biomass and an increase in the number of vascular plant species. That's very strong. It's sending a very strong message. And so, just to finish that up a little bit and sort of close the talk, where has all of this gone? Well, where it's gone is to develop a program to manage state land, because Department of Environmental Conservation paid for some of our research. And so we've developed protocols for managing state land for invasive plants and for just general land management. We weren't going very far until, thanks to our governor, we fired half of our conservation department staff, and the land managers can no longer, it's not that they like agriculture, they just can't cut the grass. Where the state wants grasslands, they can't afford to do it anymore. It's not even a matter of affording, they don't have the time to do it anymore. So they came to us and said, you think you can help us? Boy, can we help you. So they're going to be adapting our protocols for managing state lands using livestock. And at the end of the day, they're not going to have to use as much herbicide to control invasives, and they're going to be able to save money on fossil fuels because they won't be running tractors, and guys with health insurance and retirement benefits are not going to be doing the work that sheep can do. And we promise them that we won't let the sheep do the work that they can do. Okay? But at the same time, what they were going to do is, and they've started doing this already, they've got contractors. One guy is the nicest guy in the world. He's a retired publisher. He's like 80 years old. He bought a flock of goats, and he finds that he can move these goats all over the place, and people will pay him and his goats to take care of their land. And so what we're doing is we're saying, well, instead of that contractor, he's a nice guy, he's got plenty of work, what if we let young and beginning farmers have a shot at it? People who would really, people who would really like to be farming but can't afford the land. And as soon as that idea came up, Tom Gallagher from Cornell Cooperative Extension said, you know, I think I can get Farm Service Agency loans up to $50,000 to help pay for infrastructure. I don't know what these kids are going to do with $50,000 because the techniques that we use are so cheap, they really don't need $50,000 to buy a flock of sheep and that white fence and one of those boxes that charges the fence. And some medications, and if the sheep get sick, and that's about it. And a $500 sheepdog, because you do need the dog. If nothing else, to tell you when you're wrong, and they do. And so I'm not going to show you this don't read this, please. But basically, I'll tell you what it says. But basically, it's called an enterprise budget. And it says, what are your costs? What are your benefits? What will it take to be profitable? And the bottom line to that is, if you are growing a grass-fed product, and I would say, let me tell you, I'm getting $8 a pound for my lamb. And on the commodity markets, I would be getting about $2.32 for my lamb. So I make as much of my lamb, if I was doing commodity lamb, conventional lamb with grain, I would have to have 3 times as many sheep on my property. Okay, so if you can do 60 sheep on grass and sell to the specialty markets, and nobody's saying that every farmer has to feed everybody in the world. Someday we will, but right now, if you can sell to that market, you can be profitable, providing you can figure out a way to get around the hay. Hay is very expensive. Morgan solved that problem. He made an off-the-cuff remark recently, a couple of months ago, or at another meeting we were at. You don't cut hay. You just put, and I said to Pam, we're not going to cut hay. We're just going to graze as many sheep as we can, and and that's exactly what you're doing. And it works, I think. We're going to find out. But if you can find a way to get your hay, and if you're a 28-year-old guy and you're grazing some sheep, you can actually go to a guy who's cutting hay and say, if you'll give me some of your hay for half price or for free, I don't know, it depends upon how good a negotiator you are, I will work for you and help you do your hay this summer. For a certain number of days, and 9 out of 10 farmers would take that deal, and so you're not going to be able to retire on what you can make on 60 sheep, but this will give you your sheep operation. You should also have a vegetable operation. You should have other things going on because that's what diversified farming is all about. Okay, but you can get a good start on free land that eventually will allow you, just like when Pam and I were first married, we didn't buy a house right away. We rented an apartment, and eventually we had enough money to buy a house. Well, it's the same thing with a farm. Eventually you will move off that state land probably and onto either your own operation or else rent land for the needs that you have to bring together all of your operations as a farmer. And so, long story short, we can tomorrow put, just on the land that has been surveyed already, we can put over 500 farmers on the land. We can create 500 jobs. And so in summary, it's been a long talk, so I'll summarize fast. Our food system, I think, like many other aspects of our life support system, is in serious trouble. But an emergent model of agriculture based on sustainability principles and nature-friendly practices is definitely gaining traction. There's no doubt about it. It offers a viable alternative to the dominant industrial food production system. And our research on grazing has been used to develop techniques that manage invasive plants without damaging ecosystems, to understand the ecology of these systems and why our grazing protocols work, and to create opportunities for young people to enter careers in agriculture. And I think I can stop there.